Before we dive into this wild ride, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Whether it's a sunny beachfront street in Florida, a high-rise balcony in Chicago, or a cozy mountain lodge in Colorado, I love hearing just how far these Karen tales of chaos and karma can travel. The midday sun shimmered over the lake, scattering flecks of gold across the rippling water. From the dock, the pine-scented air carried the faint whine of a distant engine, though the sound was quickly swallowed by the rhythmic lap of waves against the wood. A black patrol boat with bold yellow FBI lettering rested alongside one side of the dock, its antennas rising like spears. At the far end, a white speedboat sat moored, 3 uniformed officers inside, their sunglasses flashing in the glare. Between the 2 vessels, the dock planks trembled under the weight of 2 women, both heavy-set, both red-faced with fury, yelling toward a man standing closer to shore. Patricia's floral pink blouse ballooned in the breeze, one pudgy hand stabbing the air in accusation. Cheryl stood beside her in beige slacks and a patterned blouse, her mouth twisted into a snarl as she joined in. The man, Ethan Cole, didn't move. His sunglasses hid his eyes, but the faint curl of a smirk at the corner of his mouth was enough to make Cheryl's voice climb an octave. Arms folded, khaki pants pressed neat, he looked as though he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Overhead, the thump-thump of a helicopter drew closer, a shadow sweeping over the dock. Patricia shouted something drowned by the rotor noise. Ethan just stood there. 2 days earlier, the lake had been calm, its shoreline wrapped in the quiet that had drawn Ethan out here in the first place. He'd left the city for peace, trading sirens for the calls of loons, gridlock for the easy hum of a fishing reel. His cabin sat a few hundred feet from the water, a modest structure of cedar and stone, the kind that smelled faintly of the last winter's firewood even in midsummer. That morning, he'd been at his workbench mending a frayed fishing line, a mug of coffee cooling nearby, when the knock came. It was sharp, too sharp. He opened the door to find Patricia and Cheryl standing in perfect unison, like poorly matched bookends. Patricia's hair was sprayed into an unmoving helmet, Cheryl's limp and tucked behind her ears. Both wore the same forced smile, tight at the corners, eyes alert with calculation. "Morning, Ethan," Patricia said, drawing out his name like it was a word she'd been rehearsing. "Ladies," he replied, already sensing their visit had nothing to do with neighborly courtesy. Cheryl's gaze darted past him toward the dock. "We were just checking in on community safety. Making sure everything's up to code." Patricia nodded. "Especially with the dock assignments. There's been some confusion. Seems you've got more space than you really need." Ethan leaned against the doorframe, feeling the weight of their real agenda settle in. "The dock's mine. Came with the cabin." "Technically," Patricia said, drawing the word out like taffy, "all docks fall under HOA oversight. And the board's been discussing reassignment." He didn't flinch. "Reassignment to who?" Patricia's smile widened, but it didn't touch her eyes. "To someone with a more active boating lifestyle." Cheryl chuckled softly, like they'd just shared a private joke. Ethan didn't ask who. He already knew. "I'm fine with my current arrangement," he said, and stepped back toward the door. The smiles faltered. Patricia's eyes flickered with irritation. Cheryl's lips tightened. They murmured something about reviewing the bylaws and turned away, walking in perfect sync down his gravel path. He closed the door and tried to shake the unease, but it clung to him like damp air. That evening, the light over the lake shifted to amber as the sun sank. Ethan headed down to the dock, intent on a quiet hour of fishing before dark. The spot where his boat should have been was bare. The cleats were empty, the lines dangling loose in the water. His chest tightened. He jogged back to the cabin, pulled up his security feed. Grainy footage showed the sisters mid-afternoon, Patricia's thick fingers working at his mooring ropes, while Cheryl steadied the hull. They moved with the efficiency of people who'd done something like this before. In the next clip, his boat was hitched to their pontoon, vanishing down the shoreline. He called the county sheriff's office, voice clipped. The dispatcher's tone cooled the moment he explained it was an HOA matter. An officer arrived, glanced at the footage, and delivered the verdict like it was routine. "This is a civil dispute. The dock belongs to the HOA. If they reassigned it, There's nothing criminal here. They stole my property, Ethan said. Sir, you'll need to take it up with the HOA board. The squad car taillights disappeared up the road, leaving him with a taste of metal in his mouth. He barely slept, the thought of his boat sitting in their possession gnawing at him. The next day, he walked into the HOA meeting hall, a squat building with fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. Patricia sat at the head of the table, gavel within reach, Cheryl beside her flipping through a binder. A few other board members avoided his gaze. I have evidence, Ethan said, placing a printed still from his security feed on the table. This is theft. Patricia glanced at the image and set it aside like junk mail. The board voted to reassign your dock due to underuse. Your boat isn't impound until you've paid the outstanding HOA fees. I don't owe fees. According to our recalculated ledger, you do, Cheryl said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. We're trying to keep things harmonious. Harmony. Ethan leaned forward. You towed my boat to your dock. It's being stored safely until this matter is resolved, Patricia replied, rapping the gavel once. The meeting ended without further discussion. Outside, the humid air pressed down on him, heavy with the scent of lake algae. He walked the shoreline until their property came into view. There it was, his boat, chained to their private dock like a prize they'd won. The chain was thick, padlock glinting in the sun. He considered confronting them right there, but knew how that would play. They'd spin it as harassment, maybe even call the police themselves. He turned back, fury simmering. Late that afternoon, a neighbor named Don ambled up his driveway. Don was in his 60s, retired, the sort who knew everything worth knowing about the lake community. Word is, Don said, lowering his voice, Patricia and Cheryl are taking your boat out tomorrow. Big gathering over at Pine Point. Lot of people. Ethan thanked him, though his jaw tightened until it ached. That night, he stood in his living room watching the sunset paint the water in bands of orange and gold. Somewhere across the lake, laughter drifted from their direction. Morning broke clear and sharp. From his deck, Ethan watched as the sisters, now dressed in loud, tropical shirts, pushed off from their dock in his boat. Music thumped over the water, carrying their voices. Cheryl raised a can of beer like a trophy. Patricia waved at a passing kayak. They didn't just take his boat, they flaunted it. Ethan's hands curled into fists at his sides. A direct confrontation would only end with them clutching their HOA bylaws like shields. The local authorities had already shown they wouldn't interfere. He was outnumbered in politics, outmaneuvered in procedure. For now. That evening, he stood at the end of his empty dock, the boards warm beneath his bare feet, watching the last of the light drain from the horizon. A loon called from somewhere near the cove, its mournful note stretching across the still water. He breathed in the scent of wet wood and distant campfires, the calm at odds with the knot forming in his chest. Somewhere, a plan was beginning to take shape. He didn't know exactly how yet, but he knew this much. Patricia and Cheryl had just turned a neighborly dispute into a personal war. And he wasn't about to lose. The night air was thick with the smell of pine and the faint tang of lake water, the kind of stillness where even the smallest sound seemed amplified. Ethan sat at his kitchen table, the glow of his laptop screen painting sharp lines across his face. He'd been combing through HOA documents for hours, clicking through archived meeting minutes and scanned financial reports that looked like they'd been photocopied 100 times. The fluorescent glare of the meeting hall earlier that week still burned in his mind, along with the smug tilt of Patricia's head when she dismissed him. He didn't just want his boat back anymore. He wanted the satisfaction of dismantling the false authority they wielded like a weapon. Page after page, something began to emerge. Dates that didn't match. Expenditures marked as community maintenance that lined up with the arrival of Patricia's new deck furniture. An unexplained purchase for maritime equipment that matched the month Cheryl's speedboat appeared at their dock. His eyes narrowed. It wasn't proof yet, but it was enough to smell rot. He pushed the laptop aside and leaned back in his chair, staring out through the wide cabin windows. Across the lake, their dock was faintly visible, a ghostly shape under the wash of moonlight. His boat sat tethered beside theirs, rocking slightly in the night breeze. The sight set his teeth on edge. The following afternoon, he called Sam Whitaker, a name he hadn't spoken in years. Sam had been Coast Guard for over a decade before moving inland to work in private security. When Ethan explained what had happened, Sam listened without interrupting, the faint crackle of the phone line the only response. "You've got two problems," Sam finally said. "One, they've taken your boat, but that's civil until proven otherwise. Two, if their boat's tied to shady finances, that's criminal. If you want the FBI involved, you need to link them to something bigger than HOA bullying." Ethan drummed his fingers against the counter. "Like what?" "Fraud, money laundering, stolen property. Boats are often tied to all three. You get me a hull identification number and some photos, I might be able to point you in the right direction." The plan didn't crystallize immediately. It was more like a current pulling him in a specific direction. Over the next day, he observed quietly. He made it a point to walk the public path that passed just close enough to the sisters' property to get a decent view of their dock. On the third pass, Cheryl was out hosing down the deck. She spotted him, narrowed her eyes, but didn't say a word. He nodded politely and kept walking, but not before catching the gleam of the speedboat's hull. That night, using a telephoto lens from his deck, he captured clear images. The registration number, the boat's name painted in pretentious gold script, and the make and model. Under the harsh glare of the camera's flash, the paint seemed to shimmer like something hiding a story. He sent the images to Sam, along with the serial number he'd traced from a registration. 2 days later, Sam called back. That boat was bought at a sheriff's auction 3 years ago. The original owner? Under federal investigation for embezzlement from a construction company. If the paperwork transfer wasn't clean, that's a loose end the FBI will yank on. Ethan's pulse quickened. The sisters weren't just overstepping HOA boundaries. They were sitting on a potentially hot asset. It was leverage he could use. The next morning, he uploaded a short, grainy clip from his security footage to a local boating Facebook group. It showed Patricia and Cheryl untying his boat, though their faces were barely visible. He captioned it, "Anyone missing a boat lately? Seems some neighbors are getting creative with storage." He left it and signed, letting curiosity do the rest. By noon, the post had racked up dozens of comments. People speculated. Some named names outright. Others chimed in with their own grievances. Patio inspections that felt more like raids, arbitrary fines for lawn length, whispered rumors about missing HOA funds. It spread beyond the boating group to the broader community forum, where anger simmered into something more pointed. Patricia responded on the forum by accusing certain individuals of slander. Cheryl wrote a paragraph about protecting community standards. But their words felt defensive, reactive. The control they were used to wielding was slipping, if only a little. Ethan stayed quiet publicly, but privately he compiled every piece of information he could find about the speedboat. He noted its current location on maps, documented the days it was taken out, even gathered the names of people who'd been seen aboard during lake events. The picture forming wasn't just about property theft. It was about a pattern of entitlement rooted in something dirtier. That evening, he sat in the cabin's den, the smell of rain drifting through the open windows. He drafted an anonymous email to the FBI's regional office. The subject line was simple: possible asset tied to federal investigation. In the body, he laid out the details: the boat's history, its purchase date, the suspicious spending records from the HOA's financial reports, and the attached images of the sisters using it. He didn't mention his own boat at all. This wasn't about revenge on paper. It was about pointing the right eyes in the right direction. He clicked send and closed the laptop. A sense of quiet resolve settled over him, the kind that came when you knew a wheel had been set in motion. The next day, Patricia drove by in her SUV, slowing as she passed his cabin. She had the window down, a smug smile playing across her face. She lifted her hand in a lazy wave, a gesture that was somehow both mocking and dismissive. He didn't return it. Instead, he stood on his porch and watched her taillights disappear down the road. That night, Ethan lingered on his dock long after the sun had dipped below the treeline. The moon's reflection stretched across the water like a silver road, leading straight toward the sisters' property. Faint music drifted over the lake, some upbeat tune underscored by the hum of conversation and clinking glasses. His boat sat there beside theirs, tethered, silent, waiting. He imagined the dock lit by the flashing lights of a patrol boat, the sisters' voices turning shrill as their composure cracked. It wasn't a fantasy born from spite, but from balance, the belief that arrogance always meets a reckoning. Hours later, when he finally turned in, the air was heavy with the promise of rain. Somewhere in the distance, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the hills. The timing, he thought, might be perfect. He woke to the sound of light rain tapping the cabin roof. The lake was a dull mirror under the overcast sky, its surface broken only by the occasional ripple from passing waterfowl. As he sipped his coffee, he thought of the email sitting in some agent's inbox, waiting to be read, evaluated, acted upon. By mid-afternoon, the sky had cleared to a pale blue, the air washed clean by the morning's downpour. Ethan made another quiet pass along the public path near the sisters' property. This time, the speedboat was being polished by Patricia herself, her floral blouse tucked into high-waisted shorts. She was humming to herself, oblivious to the camera phone he held low at his side, catching a slow pan of the scene. Not just the boat, but the proximity to his stolen property, chained a few feet away. That evening, he sent the new footage to the same anonymous email account he'd used before, attaching a short note. Current visual confirmation. Both vessels in place. He didn't know if it was necessary, but it felt like laying down the last breadcrumb. As twilight fell, a restless energy settled in his chest. Something was coming. He could feel it in the way the wind shifted, in the distant thump of an engine far out on the water. It wasn't here yet, but it was moving closer. Across the lake, a string of dock lights flickered on. He watched them blink into life one by one, until their glow outlined the shadow of the sisters' dock against the dark water. Somewhere over there, they were likely pouring drinks, laughing, feeling untouchable. Ethan stepped back from his own dock, the boards creaking under his boots. Tomorrow, or the day after, he thought, that feeling of untouchability would shatter. The image played in his mind again, flashing lights, stern voices, the slow unraveling of people who'd never imagined consequences catching up to them. The lake was quiet now, but it felt like the kind of quiet before a storm. The morning broke with an almost unnatural clarity, the lake like a sheet of glass under the pale gold of the rising sun. Ethan woke early, not because he had planned to, but because something in the stillness felt expectant, charged. The hum of his refrigerator seemed louder, the distant call of a gull sharper. By the time he stepped onto his porch with a mug of coffee, the air carried the faintest vibration, too steady to be the wind, too mechanical to be anything but engines on the move. From his vantage point, he could see nothing yet. The water was calm, empty, except for a single canoe far in the distance. But he could feel it, the same way a seasoned fisherman senses the weight of a strike before the line even pulls. Today was different. The wheel he'd set in motion days ago was beginning to turn. Around mid-morning, the sound grew. Low at first, then layered with another rhythm, the heavy, deliberate thump of rotor blades. He set his coffee down and stepped closer to the railing, scanning the horizon. Out beyond the far curve of the lake, a black shape emerged. It was moving fast, cutting a white wake through the water, its bow high. Even before the yellow lettering came into focus, Ethan knew. The FBI patrol boat was heading straight for the community docks. He didn't rush. He wanted to arrive as the scene was unfolding, not before. He took his time walking down the path to the shoreline, letting the sharp scent of sun-warmed pines settle around him. When he reached his dock, he could see them clearly now. Agents in dark uniforms, sunglasses reflecting the sky, hands resting on the rails as the patrol boat slowed to idle. Behind it, a smaller white speedboat followed, 3 officers seated upright, scanning the docks with the alertness of people who knew exactly what they come for. By the time the first boat nosed into the main community dock, Patricia and Cheryl were emerging from their house. They weren't dressed for the kind of day they were about to have. Patricia wore a loose floral shirt and capris, her hair unbrushed, Cheryl in beige slacks and a blouse wrinkled from sleep. Both were barefoot, moving quickly but without grace, their steps heavy on the planks as they tried to insert themselves between the agents and their prize vessel. Ethan stopped a good 20 feet away, far enough not to be involved, but close enough to see every flicker of panic on their faces. He folded his arms, the sun glinting off his sunglasses. Patricia noticed him almost immediately. Her face flushed, her arm shot out in accusation. "That's him. He's the one who," she didn't finish, because one of the agents turned toward her, holding up a hand for silence. "Ma'am, step back. We have a federal warrant for the seizure of this vessel." Cheryl barked a laugh that cracked into something shriller. "A warrant? For our boat? This is a mistake. We're respected members of this community." The agent didn't flinch. "The vessel is tied to an ongoing federal investigation into fraud and the unlawful transfer of assets. It will be seized immediately." Neighbors were starting to gather now, drawn by the unmistakable sight of a black FBI patrol boat in their sleepy lakeside enclave. Murmurs rose and fell like shifting wind. Someone pulled out a phone and began recording. Patricia noticed, her voice pitching higher as she tried to address the small crowd. "This is harassment. This is retaliation from a..." She jerked her thumb toward Ethan, but it only made the scene more compelling to the growing audience. Another agent stepped onto the sisters' dock, clipboard in hand, and began photographing the speedboat from bow to stern. Cheryl moved to block his path, her bare feet slapping against the wood. "You can't just..." The agent's voice cut her off with a tone as cold as the lake in winter. "Step aside, ma'am, or you will be physically removed." For a moment, neither sister moved. Then Patricia spun toward Ethan, her eyes sharp with a kind of loathing that came from knowing she was losing control. He didn't say a word. The satisfaction was in the silence, in the way her composure was unraveling in front of an audience she couldn't silence with HOA bylaws. The agents began untying the speedboat. Patricia climbed onto it, her stance wide, as if bracing against an invisible wind. "You'll have to drag me off," she shouted, her voice cracking. It took 2 agents to escort her down, her protests echoing across the water. Cheryl stood rigid, arms folded tight, but her eyes kept darting toward the crowd, toward the phones recording every second. As the patrol boat secured the seized vessel to tow, the scene took on a strange rhythm. The low hum of engines, the click of cameras, the whisper of onlookers passing speculation back and forth. Ethan caught pieces of it, words like fraud, embezzlement, and finally. The FBI worked methodically. An agent read off the hull identification number into a recorder. Another checked the registration against a printed document. The sisters hovered at the edge of the dock, alternately shouting at the agents and muttering to each other in quick, frantic bursts. Every so often, Patricia glanced back at Ethan, as if willing him to look guilty. But he just stood there, still as the dock posts, his arms crossed. When the last line was secured and the engines roared to life, the crowd collectively leaned forward. The patrol boat eased away, pulling the sisters' pride and joy behind it. Patricia yelled something indistinct, her voice cracking under the strain. Cheryl simply turned away, her shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on the planks beneath her feet. The boats moved out into the open water, the sound of their engines fading until only the soft lap of waves against the dock remained. The crowd began to disperse, their conversations a mix of disbelief and delight. Word would travel fast. By evening, the entire lake community would know. Ethan waited until most of them had gone before walking toward the sisters' dock. They were still there, though quieter now. Their anger cooled into something closer to shock. He didn't speak. He simply stepped onto the planks, walked past them to where his own boat was still chained, and began working at the lock with a key he'd kept in his pocket since the day it was taken. Patricia finally found her voice. "You think this is over? You've made enemies here." He didn't look at her. The chain came free with a clink, and he began coiling it neatly on the deck. "No," he said at last, his tone calm but edged with finality. "I think I just got my property back." He guided his boat away from their dock, the engine purring low. As he eased out into the channel, he caught the faint reflection of the two women standing together, smaller now, framed by the empty space where their boat had been. They didn't wave. They didn't speak. They just watched him go. Back at his own dock, Ethan tied off the boat, the knot snug and familiar. The afternoon sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the water. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and pine, and for the first time in days, he felt the tension in his shoulders ease. Later, word came that the HOA had called an emergency meeting. Though he didn't attend, the results reached him through a neighbor. Patricia and Cheryl, removed from their positions, fined heavily, and barred from holding office for the foreseeable future. It wasn't the FBI's doing, not directly. It was the weight of public humiliation, the kind that made them toxic even to their allies. That night, Ethan sat on his porch with a beer, watching the last of the daylight drain from the horizon. The lake was calm again, the kind of calm that wasn't just the absence of noise, but the presence of balance. Somewhere across the water, the sisters were undoubtedly stewing, their world smaller now, their power diminished. He took a slow sip, the taste crisp and clean, and let his gaze rest on the dark water stretching out before him. The surface reflected the first hints of starlight, each point sharp against the black. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was full of something better, something earned. In the distance, a lone boat's engine hummed, fading into the night.